The folders on the kitchen table have been sitting there for 3 days. I keep walking past them, keep finding other things to do. The dishes, the garden hose that has been leaking since Tuesday, the bird feeder that needs refilling, anything to avoid sitting down and opening them. My son called again this morning, the fourth time before 9 o'clock. I watched his name light up on the screen, and I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms, his small fist curled against my collarbone. I thought about that boy for a long moment. Then I turned the phone, face down, and went to make coffee. The notary is coming at 2. 6 weeks ago, I was standing in my sister-in-law's kitchen in Decatur, helping frost a 3-layer coconut cake, when my son called to tell me he had found the perfect solution. That was the word he used, solution, like I was a problem that needed solving. He and his wife had been talking, he said. They had done research, they had run the numbers. The house I had lived in for 31 years? The house where I raised him after his father passed? The house where the hydrangeas I planted along the back fence had finally, after a decade of coaxing, learned to bloom. That house was, according to my son and his wife, an inefficient use of equity. I held the phone against my ear and stared at the coconut cake. My sister-in-law caught my eye from across the counter. She had a spatula in her hand and a look on her face that said she could already tell something was wrong just from watching mine. There is a community, my son continued, over in Roswell. Brand new, independent living, they call it. You would have your own space, your own little apartment, a pool, a fitness center, a shuttle that takes residents to the grocery store on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a shuttle to the grocery store. I am 63 years old. I drive myself to the grocery store. I drive myself everywhere. Mom, he said, you rattle around in that house alone. It is 4 bedrooms. 4 bedrooms for one person. And the market right now, he made a sound, an exhale of something like reverence. The market right now is extraordinary. We're talking about real money, life-changing money. I asked him whose life he was talking about changing. He laughed a little, strained and careful. Yours, obviously. Come on, Mom. You know what I mean. This is about your future. I told him I would think about it and said goodbye before he could say anything else. Then I stood very still in my sister-in-law's kitchen and listened to the sound of her refrigerator humming while the frosting on the cake slowly softened at the edges. She poured me a glass of sweet tea without asking. Sometimes that is the best thing a person can do. The house on Sycamore Ridge Drive does rattle when it is just me. I know that. I have always known that. The creaks at night, the echo of footsteps in the hall, the way a room feels different when no one else has been in it for days. I understand what my son sees when he looks at it. An old woman in a house too big for her, holding on to something out of stubbornness or sentiment or both. What he does not see is what I see when I walk through it every morning. I see the notch marks on the doorframe in the hallway. Faint pencil lines tracking every inch my son grew from age 4 to 17. I see the kitchen window I stood at during the worst winter of my life, watching snow cover the backyard while my husband was in the hospital 2 miles away, and I was figuring out how to be the only one left standing. I see the garden I built from scratch on a teacher's salary and a lot of weekends. I see the place where I became who I am. But I did not say any of that to my son. I told him I would think about it, and for 3 weeks I tried to do exactly that. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to consider the possibility that he was right, that I was holding on too tight, that letting go might mean something other than loss. Then his wife started calling. She is organized, my daughter-in-law. I will say that about her. She sent me a brochure for the Roswell community, then a second one, then a comparison spreadsheet of 3 different properties in the area. She left voicemails with talking points. She texted links to articles about seniors who had downsized and described it as liberating. She called it liberating. The word sat in my stomach like something undigested. One evening, my son called and put her on speaker without telling me, and I could hear her prompting him in the background while he talked. Little nudges. Fill in this part. Don't forget the thing about the equity line. I listened to the whole thing and said very little and hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. I started to understand that this had moved past concern for my well-being. I did not realize how far it had moved until I ran into my neighbor across the street one Saturday morning. He is retired, fixes up old motorcycles in his garage, waves to me every time I pull out of the driveway. We are not close friends, but we are the kind of neighbors who notice things. He called out to me from his driveway and I walked over and he asked carefully if I had been speaking with any real estate agents lately. I told him I had not. He got a look on his face, measured, deciding something. Then he told me that a man had come by earlier that week, walked the perimeter of my property, stood at the side gate for a long time looking at the backyard. The man had a clipboard and what looked like a measuring tape. I had been at my sister-in-law's that day. I had not known anyone was here. My neighbors said the man had knocked on his door and asked questions about the neighborhood, about property upkeep, about whether the house had been updated recently. He left a card. My neighbor had written down the name of the company, Aldrich Residential Group. A developer. I thanked him and walked back across the street and stood on my porch for a long time. My son had not mentioned speaking to any developer. He had not mentioned any of this. I went inside and pulled up Aldrich Residential Group on my computer. They specialized in acquiring older residential properties in established neighborhoods and converting them into multi-unit builds, townhomes mostly, the kind that sell fast and look nothing like what was there before. There was a testimonials page. Happy faces, quick closings, smooth transactions. I sat there reading for a long time, and then I closed the laptop and went and stood in the hallway next to the notch marks on the doorframe and put my hand flat against the wood. He called that evening like nothing had happened. Asked if I had reviewed the brochure. Said the Roswell place was filling up fast, and he didn't want me to miss the window. I asked him if he had been in contact with anyone about the house. A pause, brief but real. No. He said, "Why?" "Someone walked your property this week," I said, "with a clipboard and a measuring tape." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, we were just exploring options, getting a sense of what the property might be worth if you did decide to move forward. It doesn't mean anything. You told someone they could walk my property without asking me." His voice shifted, that careful, managed tone that his wife uses. "Mom, we are trying to help you think ahead. You are not going to be able to maintain this house forever. The roof alone is going to need replacing in the next few years. And the foundation, I know the state of my own foundation," I said. "We just want what's best for you." "What's best for me," I said slowly, "is not having strangers measure my backyard without my knowledge." He sighed. That heavy, burdened sigh that was supposed to make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. I told him I needed some time to think and said goodnight. I did not sleep much. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me, and I thought about the way he had paused before answering. I thought about the measuring tape and the clipboard and the developer's website. I thought about how smoothly he had pivoted to the roof and the foundation, like he had been waiting for something to redirect to. I had raised this boy. I knew his tells. The next morning, I called a woman I had met through my church, an estate attorney who had handled things for 2 families in our congregation. Her name is Winifred. She has reading glasses. She keeps on a beaded chain around her neck, and she talks slowly and means every word. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Before anything else, I want you to understand your position clearly. This is your home. Your name is on the deed. No one can compel you to sell it. But what you're describing suggests your son may have already made representations to a third party on your behalf. That's worth understanding before it goes further. She asked me to come in. I sat across from her desk 2 days later, and she walked me through what she had found. My son had, in fact, been in contact with Aldridge Residential Group. Not just exploratory contact. He had submitted what they called a preliminary letter of intent, a letter suggesting that the property owner was considering a sale and that terms could be discussed. He had done this without telling me, without asking me. I looked at the paper she slid across the desk, and I recognized the address, my house, described as a target acquisition. I had to breathe carefully for a moment, the kind of careful breathing you learn after decades of things that knock the air out of you. Winifred let me sit in it. She did not rush me. Then she said, "You have options." I asked her to tell me all of them. The one that caught my attention was something called a transfer on death deed. It allows you to designate who receives the property after you are gone, but it does not remove the house from your estate or affect your ownership in any way while you are living. No one, not a son, not a developer, not anyone, can touch it without your consent. The second option was to designate the property to a trust, naming my sister-in-law and her husband as co-trustees alongside myself, with my granddaughter, my son's daughter, who is 11 years old and has my late husband's eyes, as the future beneficiary. Winifred explained this carefully. She said, "This removes the house from the equation entirely. As far as your son and daughter-in-law are concerned, it belongs to you while you are living, and it goes to your granddaughter when you are not. Your son cannot contest it easily, and the developer has no avenue." I thought about my granddaughter. She has visited every summer since she could walk. She knows which drawer the good scissors are in and which step on the back porch squeaks and how long the hydrangeas take to open. She knows this house the way children know places they feel safe in. "Do it," I said. Winifred nodded once and reached for her pen. My son called while I was still at her office. I let it ring. He called again. Then his wife called. Then my son called twice more in the span of 20 minutes. Winifred glanced at my phone on the corner of the desk and said nothing. I signed the last page and she notarized it and slid me a copy in a manila envelope. I held it in my lap for a moment. The paper inside was thin, but it felt like something solid, something real. I picked up the phone and called my son back. He answered immediately. "Mom, finally, I need to talk to you about the timeline. Aldridge said there might be some flexibility on the closing date if we—" I said his name once clearly. He stopped. "I need you to listen," I said. "I am only going to say this once." The silence on the other end stretched. I could hear his wife in the background. That same ambient presence, waiting. "I have just come from my attorney's office," I said. "The house has been placed in a trust. It goes to your daughter when I am gone. There is no sale. There is no closing date. There is no sale. The house is no longer something that can be discussed with developers or anyone else. It is settled. Mom." His voice cracked on the word. A strange sound. Half disbelief. Half something I could not name. I allowed the silence to sit. Then his wife's voice came through, sharp and controlled. "That is not legal. You cannot just do that unilaterally. We have already made commitments. What Aldridge expects is not my concern," I said. "I made no commitments to anyone. You made commitments in my name without my knowledge or consent. Those are not the same thing." "Mom," he said again, quieter now. "Mom, we needed this. Do you understand that? We needed this to work out. We are underwater. The business, the mortgage on the new house, everything. We thought if we could just—" He stopped, caught himself, tried to compose. I felt something break open in my chest. Not anger. Something older and more complicated than anger. "I know," I said, and I did know. I had seen the signs for over a year. The way he avoided certain conversations, the way his wife had stopped mentioning vacations and renovations the way she used to, the way he called more often. but said less. I had seen it, and I had hoped I was wrong, and I had not asked, because I was afraid of what asking would uncover. You should have told me, I said. You should have come to me and told me the truth instead of going behind my back and making plans with developers and sending strangers to measure my property. Mom, we thought you would say no. You were right, I said. I would have. Because this is my home, and no matter how much you are struggling, the answer was never to take it from me. He went quiet. The kind of quiet that means a person is trying to hold themselves together. His wife's voice again, less controlled now. So what are we supposed to do? I don't know, I said honestly, but I am not the solution to that question. I am your mother. I am not a line item. I ended the call. I sat in the parking lot of Winifred's office building for a long time after that. The envelope was in my passenger seat. The afternoon was very still and bright. The kind of October afternoon that feels like it knows it is beautiful. I watched a woman walk past with a stroller and a coffee cup and a dog on a leash, managing all three with the focused calm of someone who has learned to carry many things at once. I thought about my son as a little boy again. Not the man on the phone with the cracked voice, but the boy. The one who used to save the last bite of dessert for me without being asked. The one who cried at the end of movies and tried to hide it by suddenly needing to use the bathroom. I thought about who he was before he learned to be afraid of not having enough. I did not know when that fear had gotten so large that it had made him capable of this. That was the part that hurt most. Not the betrayal exactly. The distance it revealed. The way something had been growing in him that I had not been allowed to see. The first 2 months were hard in the way that grief is hard, not dramatic. Just present. A weight you carry alongside everything else. My son did not call for 6 weeks. His wife did not call at all. My granddaughter sent me a drawing in the mail, a house with blue hydrangeas and a woman standing in the garden, and I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet and cried a little and then went outside and pulled weeds for an hour. The house stayed mine. That part was simple. The way the right things sometimes are, once you finally do them. I had coffee with Winifred twice that fall, not for legal reasons, just because she had become someone I wanted to know better. She told me she had handled cases like mine more times than she could count. Adult children making plans around aging parents as though age itself were a kind of incapacity. She said what struck her about my situation was how long I had given him the benefit of the doubt. That was the word she used. Generosity. I did not feel generous. I felt tired. But maybe those are sometimes the same thing. In January, my son came to the door. He came alone. No wife, no phone in his hand. He stood on the porch in the cold with his hands in his coat pockets, and he looked exactly like the boy who used to ring the bell even though he lived there, because he thought it was polite. I opened the door and he looked at me and he said, "I don't have anything prepared. I just needed to come." I stepped back and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. He looked around the kitchen the way people look at places they have been trying not to think about. His eyes went to the door frame in the hallway where the pencil marks are, and he stared at it for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "I convinced myself it was logical, that it made sense, that I was helping you by helping us at the same time." He shook his head. I think I knew it wasn't right, and I just kept moving fast enough not to have to think about it clearly. I listened. "I should have talked to you," he said. "I should have just told you we were struggling. I was ashamed. And I thought, I don't know what I thought, that if I framed it right as something for you, you would go along with it. I told myself that enough times that I started to believe it." I looked at him. My son, 60% gray now at the temples, which still startles me sometimes. He looked very tired. I said, "I would have helped you. If you had come to me honestly, I would have found a way to help you, not with the house, but some other way. That conversation was always available to you." He nodded, eyes down. "You didn't have to take I said. You could have asked. I know, he said quietly. I know that now. We did not resolve everything that morning. I want to be honest about that because I have heard too many stories that end with one conversation and a hug and everything repaired, and that has never been how healing works in my experience. Healing is slow and uneven, and sometimes you think you have arrived somewhere and then something small happens, a certain phrase, a certain look, and you realize you are still in the middle of it. But he came. He came without being asked, without preparation, without his wife beside him coaching. He came alone, and he sat at my table and he told me the truth. That was something. That was enough to be worth keeping. I walked him to the door when he left. The hydrangeas along the back fence were bare and gray in the winter light, the way they always are before they come back. They always come back. I planted them 14 years ago, and every spring since they have returned to remind me that I was right to believe they would. He paused on the porch and looked at them. Then he looked at me. I love you, he said. I'm sorry. I know, I said. I love you too. No, go home and talk to your wife, honestly this time, about all of it. He nodded and walked to his car, and I watched until he pulled out of the driveway. Then I stood on the porch for a while in the cold with my coffee, and I looked at this house. My house, the one I am not leaving. There are things you spend your whole life building, slowly, without always knowing you are doing it. The garden and the notch marks on the door frame and the muscle memory of knowing exactly which drawer holds what you are looking for, the knowledge of how a place sounds at 3 in the morning, and which window lets in the first light, and where the robins build every April in the elm by the back gate. Nobody gets to take those things. Not a developer, not a letter of intent, not a son who was frightened and made bad choices, not anyone. That is what I learned from all of this. Not that my son is a bad person. He is not. He is a scared one, which is different and, in its own way, harder to watch. Not that love is always enough to prevent harm. It is not, and pretending otherwise helps no one. But that knowing what is yours and standing in it, refusing to be reasoned or guilted or managed out of it, is not stubbornness. It is how you survive the people who love you imperfectly. It is how you protect the life you built when no one else was watching. What did this story stir up for you? And where in the world are you listening from today? I have thought about this a lot since everything settled down. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, but the way you turn a stone over in your hand when you were trying to understand what it is made of. What my son did not happen overnight. That is the part that took me the longest to sit with. He did not wake up one morning and decide to deceive me. It built slowly, the way most things that go wrong do, one small justification at a time, one careful framing, one conversation where he told himself that what he was doing was actually for my benefit. I think he believed that, at least partly, for a while. And that is what makes it complicated. It is much easier to reckon with someone who knew they were doing wrong and did it anyway. It is harder when the person you love has simply told themselves a story long enough that the story started to feel true. There is something that happens when we are afraid, and we do not say so. Fear has a way of finding other shapes. It puts on the costume of practicality, of logic, of concern for someone else. My son was drowning, and instead of reaching out his hand and saying that plainly, he looked around for something to grab onto that did not require him to admit he was struggling. He found my house. He found a developer. He built a plan and dressed it up as forward thinking and called it helping me. The house did not change. I did not change. What changed was that I finally saw clearly what had been happening in the space between us. The distance I had noticed but not named, the evasions I had given him the benefit of the doubt on one too many times. There is a cost to that kind of generosity, not always. But sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is stop making it easy for them to avoid the truth. Winifred asked me once, after it was all done, whether I felt any guilt about the trust, about removing the house from the equation entirely. I thought about it honestly before I answered, because the question deserved that. I said no. Not because I do not love my son, I do and I always will, but because what he needed from me in that moment was not my property. What he needed was to face what he had done and understand that love does not authorize that kind of taking. That was the only real thing I had to give him. Not the house. That. The pencil marks on the doorframe are still there. My granddaughter measured herself against them last summer, delighted to find she had almost caught up to where her father was at her age. She does not know any of what happened. One day she might. I hope by then she knows the house well enough to understand why it was worth protecting. What I know now, more than anything, is this: the life you build quietly, without applause, without anyone watching. The garden, the doorframe, the 31 years of small decisions that make a place yours, that life deserves to be defended. Not angrily, not bitterly, but clearly and without apology. Knowing what is yours is not enough. You have to be willing to stand in it when someone tries to convince you otherwise, even when that someone is someone you love. Especially then.